Hello, everybody. My name is Ariel Lopez. Welcome to my podcast. And today we are going to be discussing authoritarian style of teaching. And welcome in. Let's get started. Alrighty. So to start off with, I would like to note that personally, my credibility comes from me being a dancer, as well as a student my entire life, as well as a child, thanks to my parents. But I would like to shine light on the fact of authoritarian style of teaching and how it can really affect people and, students, children, and sometimes parents can overlook these things or it doesn't get carried with as much weight as necessary. So today I'm going to be educating and kind of shining the light and hopefully changing your perspective on a few things and maybe even your opinion. Alrighty. So I did do some research into this topic, and I ran into this blog site called Quora, and I ran into the question of asking, why is authoritarian parenting considered good? And for those of you who don't know, authoritarian style of teaching is very similar to a military style of teaching, very do this because I said it, kind of no explanation kind of thing. Tendencies of kids that are taught like this usually have rebellious phases towards authority due to feeling the lack of connection and also feeling the lack of comfortability to ask questions or not to question the authority. That's kind of just the whole preface of it, is to not question anybody, always do what they say, and there's no really reasoning behind it or any education behind it. It's kind of just what is said and done. But yeah, on to the why is authoritarian parenting considered good question on Quora blog. A lot of parents shared their opinion on the authoritarian teaching style. One parent, actually Matt Anderson, responded to the question by saying, if you want your kids to be scared of you and resent you later in life. I was an authoritarian parent. My motivation was good, protect my kids from harm and make tough decisions for them. The problem is that they never figure out how to make decisions for themselves and will always second guess their decisions when they do make them. And that really just showed how sometimes parents can reanalyze how they're teaching their kids and how, it could be presented to them as something that is beneficial for them and they just don't know yet. But I think it's important as a parent to also look into how it can affect your child later in life and how it's not only affecting you and how you're teaching your lessons, but also how it's presenting authoritarian and the comfort and connection people can have as adults between questions and making sure that they truly understand something is very important, especially going into a creative field, asking a lot of questions, making sure you know the background information, going into professional an environment. That's super important to really understand what you're trying to achieve and really having a comfort within yourself to be able to ask important questions and really understand what you're trying to do. It can really level out some anxiety for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people don't understand where these children nowadays are getting so much anxiety from. And I think it has a lot to do with how people are taught. Now that we've looked kind of into how parents have done this, I'd also like to shine some light on authoritarian teaching style in the classroom and how some parents actually don't know how it's being used in the classroom. So I've heard a lot of testimonials from dancers myself, and this is more in a dance classroom, but this could go for coaches, this can go in an educational style classroom, in a school, in dance, in music, anything like that, where people really, you're not always there for your kids. You want the best for them. You want them to be taught by great people, but you can't be there all the time to see how they're being taught, right? So I think it's important to also pay attention to all of these influences that these people have on these children. Children are very big into taking in information at such a young age. They're very easily influenced, and they pick up on a lot of different mannerisms from people they're around a lot of the time. And if you really think about it, teachers are with kids 5 days out of the week for at least 8 hours, and sometimes more. And especially in a coaching environment or a studio environment, it's really important to understand the coaching styles that is going on, because it can really affect your child within the sport. It could affect the child within any type of event that they're partaking in. It can really damage their confidence and motivation within it. And so I feel that a lot of parents get frustrated with their kids because they don't understand why they want to quit, or why they're lacking dedication and motivation. But they're more blaming the kids for the lack of motivation and dedication, when it's not really read into enough as to why this is happening. And in personal experience, that actually happened within my own childhood in my dance environment. And my parents worked a lot, and so I was often at the studio just with my instructors and my peers, and they would often not understand what was happening within the studio. And so come to find out, my mom eventually found out how her style was, and how damaging it could be to a young child, and to their confidence, to their technique. It could be belittling. It really makes the kids question themselves. And she saw that it was coming home with a lot of anxiety, and I was just mentally drained a lot of the time. And so she finally was asking me, like, okay, so what's going on? How are your teachers treating you? How's dance going? And I would brush it off, because that's what I was always taught. Like, this is just how it's supposed to be. This is how people teach. You kind of just have to accept it and grow. You can't be a crybaby and move on from that. And very similarly, that's how I was taught in my upbringing from my parents, but with more understanding, and more questions were asked. So that was nice, because I did have some comfort in asking them questions such as, am I supposed to be treated like this? Can I ask you a question about so-and-so? Can I ask you a question about a specific topic? There was just comfort in that, where I never felt like I was going to be in the wrong all the time. But with my dance studio teacher, I felt like I was wrong 99% of the time. Nothing that I did was right. And I got very little praise. So it was very discouraging. And I felt like a lot of kids felt like that. And a lot of these dancers were coming out of the studios as adults and had really chronic anxiety, like couldn't do anything without having a support system behind them. And I think that was very interesting to kind of see the correlation between, because people weren't really figuring it out and weren't really looking into it that hard. But if you really wanted to ask about someone's background and you put a lot of dancers in one room, we'll pretty much all have similar upbringings in a studio setting, and we'll all have similar experiences within that. So to kind of digress from that, I did want to mention there was a couple of students that I had in here that I wanted to share their testimonials about how they were treated in the studio. Let's see. So I did do some research on the topic, and I was able to find an article written by Charlotte Carmichael. And she was a dancer when she was younger, and she was brought up in a studio space. And she actually went on to continue to dance after her high school, which is typically when a lot of dancers quit and kind of step down from that and go into a different career path. But she, on the topic, she had to say she says, dancers who want to impress their authoritarian teachers must adhere to the strict codes of oppression that authoritarian teachers enforce. This results in psychological and habitual ramifications that often mean dancers adhere to a culture of oppression throughout their professional careers and potentially continue to perpetuate an authoritarian culture once they become teachers themselves. And I think that's really important to kind of look at, because once kids are raised like that, it's kind of just in their DNA. It's kind of just ingrained into who they are. And so it's just a constant kind of cycle of people being raised and treated like that. So I think that was very interesting to kind of look at and kind of put a perspective into, especially when I'm speaking to teachers and parents. I really like to see where their heads are at and how they treat their kids. As a teacher myself now, that I teach dance at a studio, and I would really just like to see where their kids, how their kids are doing, how the parents treat their kids, how other teachers treat them, how their school is going, because a lot of this can actually affect them later in life, and I don't want them to be affected by me. I only want to affect them in a positive way, and I want them to do their best. And I think a lot more research should go into how we can incorporate a more authoritative style of teaching. And that's kind of more of how we incorporate both aspects of kind of not being over authoritarian, but also not being overly lenient. So it's kind of a combination where the kids feel free to ask questions, but there's also a level of mutual respect between the two. And I don't think any child should really be pressed into having less respect just because they're younger. I think it's more of like, this is a learning time in their life, and it's important to kind of look at both perspectives. Of course, children, it's harder to show them different perspectives in their time of life, but I think if we kind of open that door a little bit earlier, I think it'll be easier to kind of make this progression into a different style of teaching and create a better culture within the dance industry and within the teaching industry, and overall just make a difference in all these kids' lives. And hopefully it will snowball into a better teaching and a better next generation that doesn't come from so much vulnerability and trauma. But thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you found a new perspective. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.